Job chapter 9. If you're visiting with us, the black Bible in the chair in front of you, you'll find Job. Job chapter 9 on page 374. Job chapter 9, and we're going to study chapters 9 and 10 this morning. Much for us to study. Again, that black Bible, 374. Start at the beginning of the book and then go forward to 374. Job chapter 9. Here you go. Then Job answered, "In truth, I know that this is so. How can a man be in the right before God? If one wished to dispute with him, he could not answer him once in 1,000 times. Wise in heart, mighty in strength, who has defied him without harm? God, who removes the mountains, they know not. When he overturns them in his anger, who shakes the earth out of its place and its pillars tremble, who commands the sun not to shine and sets a seal upon the stars, who alone stretches out the heavens and tramples down the waves of the sea, who makes the bear Orion and the Pleiades and the chambers of the south, who does great things unfathomable and wondrous works without number. Were he to pass by me, I would not see him. Were he to move past me, I would not perceive him. Were he to snatch away, who could restrain him? And who could say to him, what are you doing? Verse 13, God will not turn back his anger. Beneath him crouch the helpers of Rahab. How then can I answer him, choosing my words before him? For though I were right, I could not answer. I would have to implore the mercy of my judge. If I called and he answered me, I could not believe that he was listening to my voice, for he bruises me with a tempest and multiplies my wounds without cause. He will not allow me to get my breath and saturates me with bitterness. If it is a power, behold, he is the strong one. And of justice, who can summon him? Though I am righteous, my mouth will condemn me. Though I am guiltless, he will declare me guilty. I am guiltless. I do not take notice of myself. I despise my life. It is one. Therefore I say, he destroys the guiltless and the wicked. If the scourge kills suddenly, he mocks the despair of the innocent. The earth is given into the hand of the wicked. He covers the faces of his judges. If it is not he, then who is it? Verse 25. Now my days are swifter than a runner. They flee away, they see no good. They slip by like reed boats, like an eagle that swoops on its prey. Though I say, I will forget my complaint, I will leave off my countenance and be cheerful. I am afraid of all my pains. I know that you will not acquit me. I am accounted wicked. Why then should I toil in vain? If I should wash myself with snow and cleanse my hands with lye, yet you would plunge me into the pit, and my own clothes would abhor me. For you're not a man as I am, that I may answer him. He is not a man as God, that we may go to court together. There is no umpire between us who may lay his hand upon us both. Let him remove his rod from me, and let not dread of him terrify me. Then I would speak and not fear him, but I am not like that in myself. I loathe my own life, he says in chapter 10. I will give full vent to my complaints. I will speak in the bitterness of my soul. Verse 2. I will say to God, do not condemn me. Let me know why you contend with me. Is it right for you indeed to oppress, to reject the labor of your hands, and to look favorably on the schemes of the wicked? Have you eyes of flesh, or do you see as a man sees? Are your days as the days of a mortal, or your years as man's years, that you should seek for my guilt and search after my sin? According to your knowledge, I am indeed not guilty. Yet there is no deliverance from your hand. Your hands fashioned made me altogether. And would you destroy me? Remember now that you have made me as clay. Would you turn me into dust again? Did you not pour me out like milk and curdle me like cheese? Clothe me with skin and flesh and knit me together with bones and sinews? You've granted me life and steadfast love, and your cares preserve my spirit. Yet these things you've concealed in your heart, I know that is within you. If I sinned, and you would take note of me, and would not acquit me of my guilt. If I am wicked, woe to me. And if I am righteous, I dare not lift up my head, sated with disgrace and conscious of my misery. And should my head be lifted up, then you would hunt me like a lion, and again you would show your power against me. You renew your witnesses against me, and increase your anger toward me. Hardship after hardship is with me. Why then have you brought me out of the womb? Would that I had died and no eye had seen me. I should have been as though I had not been carried from womb to tomb. Would he not let my days be? Would he not let my few days alone? Withdraw from me that I may have a little cheer before I go, and I shall not return. To the land of darkness and deep shadow. The land of utter gloom as darkness, of deep shadow without order, and which shines as the darkness. Some things just don't add up. This is the title to this story. A store clerk just rung up a customer who was purchasing 2 items that are part of a 2 for $5 promotion there in the store. So the customer sighs in his exasperation. You didn't ring this up correctly. They're supposed to be 2 for $5. The clerk. I'm sorry, I'm pretty sure the items came to $5 before tax. May I look at the receipt again to make sure? The customer. You think I don't know what I'm talking about? The customer slams the receipt on the counter and jabs her finger at the prices. Customer. See what I'm talking about? You rang both items up at $2.50. The clerk. Yes. $2.50 plus $2.50 is $5. The customer. Whatever, you aren't worth my time. Yeah. Another story. The store clerk just finished ringing out the customer's items. He hands the clerk a gift card for another store. It's the same color as the store's rewards card, so the clerk thinks he's just isn't paying attention and has them confused. There goes the conversation. The clerk. Sir, this is whatever the store gift card. We can't take this. The customer. No, you can. Take the gift card. The clerk. No, I can't. This is for the other store. You're at this hardware store right now. Customer. No, take the gift card. I want to pay with that. This goes on for a few more minutes with the customer insisting that the clerk take the gift card for the other store. The clerk even running the card through the scanner just in case. The customer. Wait, that is a other store gift card, isn't it? The clerk. Yes. The customer. And I'm at the hardware store, aren't I? The clerk. Yes. The customer. Oh, takes the gift card. So what do I owe you? The clerk. $30. He hands the clerk a $20 and stares expectantly. The clerk. And then it's still $10, sir. The customer. You've got the $20. The clerk. Right. And 30 minus 20 is still 10. The customer. But you're holding the $20. The clerk. Yes, but your total is more than $20. The customer. I gave you $20. This goes on for a few more minutes too. Finally, the customer says, wait, did you say it's $30? Some things just don't add up, do they? And when you look at the book of Job, and specifically in these 2 chapters, this is not going to add up either. And we're looking at the book of Job, and the title, the theme for the book of Job is trusting our sovereign God within our painful, unknown suffering. Unknown in the sense, not that you've done something wrong and you're facing the consequences of that, or this happened to you and you're facing the repercussions of that. That's not the type of sin or suffering that we're talking about due to sin. It's suffering that comes when you haven't necessarily done anything wrong. Like Donna, cancer. She's dealing with this now. What does she do? Well, she's called to trust our sovereign God within her painful, unknown suffering. And she's called to do that even when things just don't add up. Even when things just don't add up. And that's what's happening with Job. Things just don't add up for him. He doesn't understand what's going on. And there's confusion that's arising in Job's life. Here in chapters 9 and 10. Confusion as how he puts things, how he puts 2 and 2 together. 2 plus 2 is supposed to equal 4. 5 plus 2 should equal 7, but right now 5 plus 2 equals 20 for Job. Here's a statement for you. Even when things just don't add up. Job knew God was good. That's pain. He knew pain came from God. Job knew he was an upright person. He knew that suffering did not come from a particular sin, and yet he still had tremendous pain. It's not adding up. And it's the type of pain that you only see with the wicked. So what's Job thinking right now? See, this is hard for us as we're going through this book, because as you're reading this conversation, it's really hard for us to discern his mood without being able to hear his tone of voice. I mean, you do that when you send an email to somebody. When you send an email, it's hard to discern the tone of voice. Somebody might say in the email, I sure would like to meet with you this week. Now, you can take that one of two ways. It would be, I sure would like to meet with you this week, or I sure would like to meet with you this week, right? You don't know the tone. It's hard to see that tone. It's hard to see the tone here that Job is writing from. And there's actually 2 ways you can look at it. And by the way, it's very dangerous for us because we're only guessing at which tone Job is using. It's dangerous. There's 2 tones you can see here. One tone is this: sarcasm, bitterness, scornful, accusing God. That's one tone you can see from Job. Here in this chapter, chapters 9 and 10. Another tone, though, is confused, trusting and yet fearful, grasping, searching, seeking, longing. So was Job charging God with mismanagement and injustice? Was he being sarcastic? Almost making out God to be sinister. Is that how Job's tone is coming across? Or was Job attacking the faulty thinking of himself and his friends? Being confused himself about God and how and why God does the things that he does. I prefer the latter. I don't think Job is being sarcastic here. I don't think Job is being scornful. Now, some might take that. As a matter of fact, all the books that I've read, all of them except for one took that viewpoint. That Job is being sarcastic and questioning the justice of God here. I don't think he was doing that. I'm going with the one guy who didn't think that. Now, you might differ. That's fine. But the point of view I'm coming from is that Job was not being sarcastic. Job was just confused. He accepted what his friends had to say. God, prosper the wicked, prosper the righteous, and punish the wicked. We went farther than them. See, they had a fit God in your box mentality. Fit God in your box speech. And Job challenged their conclusion because Job didn't fit the norm. I mean, how do you make sense of this man who in chapter 1 was called upright, in chapter 2 was called upright, and yet he's suffering as he was wicked, as if he was wicked? That's what doesn't add up. In other words, I think the person that Job was mocking was his friends, not God. So as we go through this text, here's some questions for you to think about. And I'll put other ones up here as well. What are the boxes in your life? In other words, what box does God not fit in? You have a box. I have a box where God has to fit in this box. What are we demanding of God? And we even realize we're demanding this of God. So let this passage do, if there's anything, if you check out the rest of the message, get this part. What are the boxes? What do you need God to fit in? And if he doesn't fit that in, then you write him off. Or you say, you're not doing things, so I want you to do things. And the boxes that we have for God. Evaluate that. in your life. Chapter 9, verse 2 begins the premise for us. And the premise that Job begins is here. How can we be right before God? How can we be right before God? What does he mean by this? He will unpack it. Verse 2, he says, in truth, I know this is so. So he's saying, Bildad, okay, I know what you said is true, but how can a man be right before God? If one wished to speak with him, he, that man, not God, could not answer him once in 1,000 times. Bildad, I know it's a true principle, but how can you win a legal dispute with Almighty God? How can I justify myself before God on my own? And then say, okay, I'm righteous, so I'm not going to suffer. That's what he's asking. Bildad had said, God prospered the righteous and brought suffering to the wicked. But what makes us so awesome and great that we think we can demand from God? That's what he's asking. You guys think that God will owe a person who is righteous in God's sight? He's saying that to his friends. But Job's saying, I'm saying that though a person is righteous, that doesn't give them a get out of suffering card. I'm going to pull out the get out of suffering card. Okay, God, I've been righteous, I've been pure in mind, so I can get out of suffering now. Here's my card. Here it is. Don't do that. Don't do that to me. Yes, and that's what happens. We start crying. Right? See, what happens is they're painting God into a corner. They're backing God up into a corner. Say, okay, God, you have to act like this. Job's saying no. The friends, they thought they could package God all nice and neat. Prosper, righteous, punish, wicked. Evil people don't suffer. Evil people, they are the ones who suffer. They don't prosper. Evil people suffer. Righteous prosper. They don't suffer. It's not like that. Job vehemently attacked their reasoning. And that's what I think he's doing here. He's not attacking God. He's attacking them. And that's for us too. God has to be like this. Many a nights have I thought that. 2 o'clock in the morning. God, you're supposed to be like this. So what about our situation? What about your situation? Is there sin in your life? We should evaluate if there's sin in our life. We should do that. Okay, yeah, sure. What if there isn't? What do you do? And you're suffering. What do you do? You trust God. He will do what he's going to do. You trust him. Though you are suffering, you trust him within that suffering. He might not fit in your box, friends. So there's this premise that Job starts from. Okay, how can somebody be made right before God? How can I do that? It just doesn't add up, guys, because even though you might be righteous before God, we got to see his power, and yet I'm still going to suffer. So he's going to start in now. This is how things don't add up for Job. He's going to say, look, I know who God is. This is how great God is. He's so majestic and awesome and powerful. Notice how he brings us up in verses 4 through 14. Wise in heart, mighty in strength. I think the ESV, if you have an ESV, I think that translates that next part of verse 4 much better. Who has hardened himself against God and succeeded? How can we secure vindication with God? Summoning him according to our simple formulas. Do this, I'll get that. God is God. He is not human. He does not think like we think. His power and wisdom are limitless. That's why he brings us up here. He's wise in heart, mighty in strength. He can do as he pleases. No one can restrain God. And notice how he describes it here. Removes the mountains in fire. Overturns them in his anger. Shakes the earth out of its place. Maybe volcanic activity he's talking about. Pillars tremble. Maybe he's talking about earthquakes. Commands the sun. Seal upon the stars. Stretches out the heavens. Tramples down the waves of the sea. Who is the one who says to the sea, this far you go, and no more? Verse 9, next to the bear, Orion, Pleiades, the chambers of God, the south, the stars he's talking about. Constellations. His great unfathomable things, wondrous works without number. Same thing that Eliphaz brought up in chapter 5. God is superior over them. He controls them for his purposes. He does wondrous works without number. And then notice what he says in verse 11, "When you pass by me, I will not see him. Remove past me, I will not perceive." What does he mean by this? God is not visible in natural elements. He transcends them. You just see the effects of his presence by these things. Job is emphasizing the transcendence of God. He's beyond us. He's not like us. And notice he says here in verse 12, "Were he to snatch away him, who could restrain him? Who could say to him, what are you doing?" God can stop, he can restrain, he can take a person out without anyone stopping him. He calls people to give an account for their actions. He says, you give an account for what you've done, but no one can challenge God and say, you give an account for what you've done. We can't say that to God. You see, that's why you say, we see his power, we see his greatness, we see, here's his wisdom. This is how great God is. Verse 13, God will not turn back his anger. Beneath him crouches the helpers of Rahab. In other words, God does whatever he pleases. No one can stop him. Rahab is a mythological sea monster. And it's used here by Job to symbolize chaos. That's in opposition to God, but what God does in chaos is he brings it under control. He reigns over all creation. He defeats all of them. He's the master of all, even of evil. And then verse 14. How then can I answer him? Choosing my words before him. How can Job answer to God due to his greatness, thinking that God owes him something? If I'm righteous, so God owes me? Job cannot match words with God. Job was not questioning God's justice sarcastically. Job's whole worldview is being turned upside down. I mean, the thought process was that God prospers the righteous. He punishes the wicked. But I'm suffering as if I'm wicked. This doesn't make sense to me. I'm confused. And this is where he goes into. God is so awesome, powerful, and great, but things just don't add up because he said, yet we still suffer. God is so magnificent and powerful. I mean, he commands the seas. He says the sun, you're not going to shine. He does this, and yet I'm still suffering? 15 through 21. 15, for though I were right, I could not answer. And if you actually take in the Hebrew, the lo, which is not, if you take it with the next part of the verse, it would actually read like this, which this is what I think it should read. For though I'm right, I won't answer. I won't appeal to my judge for mercy. Why is he saying that? Because that's what Bildad wanted him to do in chapter 8, verse 5. You implore God for mercy. He said, why am I doing that? I haven't done anything wrong. I didn't do anything wrong to warrant this suffering, but I'm still suffering. That's the whole point. Because look at verse 16. If I called and he answered me, I could not believe that he was listening to my voice. Why? For he bruises me with a tempest and multiplies my wounds. Notice the phrase, without cause. Guys, even friends, what he's saying, Job's saying to his friends, even if I do call out to him, he won't listen to me because I'm still suffering. I didn't do anything wrong. And notice, without cause. Interesting. That's the same words used by our Lord in chapter 2, verse 3 against Satan. And it's the same words that Satan used in chapter 1, verse 9. Interesting, isn't it? Job is saying, I am bruised, my wounds are multiplied. There's no sinful reason that I'm suffering, but I'm still suffering. Guys, this doesn't solve the problem. Just because you're righteous, it doesn't give you a get out of suffering free card. It doesn't do that. Notice he says in verse 18, he will not allow me to get my breath, but saturates me with bitterness. I can't catch my breath. I'm in utter turmoil and sorrow. Notice how he realized that the suffering was from God. In verse 19, if it's of power, behold, he's the strong one. It's just, if it's of justice, who can summon him? God is the one who's strong. God is the one who's wise. Job's saying, I'm the one who's weak. I'm the one who's foolish. I cannot demand anything from God. Yet you guys think I should. Look at verse 20. Though I am righteous, my mouth will condemn me. Though I am guiltless, he will declare me guilty. I am guiltless. I do not take notice of myself. I despise my life. Then I'll take the next part of verse 22. It is all one. What's he doing? See, Job knew there was no sin to bring on this suffering. But how does he establish it? I mean, his friends were no help. Way to go, Bildad and Eliphaz. He's only going to listen to God's accusation. In other words, only God will be the one to say to him, this is where you've sinned. That's why he says, I am guiltless, he says, but he will declare me guilty. I will have him declare me guilty, not you guys. Was he being cynical? No. He was being hopeful. And yet he was in turmoil. Job wasn't being arrogant. Notice he was being self-loathing. I'm guiltless, but I'm not going to take notice of myself. I despise my life. It's all one. Or it's all the same. He's not crying unjust with God. Job realized he could not establish his own righteousness before God, and he was beginning to understand that his moral life did not give him any control over God, which baffled all of them. See, they're not used to this line of reasoning. They're used to the box. God, you're supposed to fit in this box. But what do you say about children who die at birth? What do you say to the parent who lost their little baby from the SIDS? What do you do with that? What do you tell them? Someone who loves Christ, who's involved in the church, and a pastor, an elder, someone who's just loving Christ and loving on people, and you're going to tell me that they did sin, that's why that happened to them? See, that's the box that we set up for God. And Job's saying, you guys got to break down that box because it just doesn't work. Because I'm still suffering. I realize God's power, but isn't God powerful enough to stop my suffering? You see, it doesn't add up. And notice he goes farther. The righteous and the wicked suffer. Look, guys, it doesn't add up. Sorry. He says this in verse 22 to 28. Therefore I say, he destroys the guiltless and the wicked. If the scourge kills suddenly, he mocks to spare the innocent. The earth is given to the hand of the wicked. He covers the face of his judges. If it's not him, then who is it? You think you're so smart, Bildad? God brings suffering to both the righteous and the wicked. God allows the sun to shine upon the righteous and the unrighteous, said Jesus. That's a positive spin on things. God allows the rain to fall upon the righteous and the unrighteous. God allows terrible things to happen, and as people face suffering in his life, good and bad come from him. Wait a minute. Why don't we just read that? Oh, I remember. Remember chapter 2? His wife said, curse God and die. What's the matter with you, fella? And he says, should we not accept adversity from God as well as good? Remember that? That's what he's saying. God's people will cry out to him for help. but he'll let them struggle. They will suffer. They will strive. Then they'll die. That's life. Look, evil regimes are in this world right now, right? And God's people, our brothers and sisters, they're being persecuted, aren't they? Evil men build up their empires at the expense of the weak. Freedoms are taken away. Liberty is squelched. And if it's not God who brings us about according to his perfect plan, who's the one doing it? Someone greater than God? I don't think so. He gives a country into the power of the wicked. He lets rulers coerce and exploit the poor and the needy so that these rulers increase their wealth. One writer wrote, oppression is rampant, the masses are exploited, all avenues of redress are shut off. Such rulers relish their cruel exercise of power. Just read the newspaper. His friends wanted Job to plead his case, and Job's saying, why? My God owes me nothing. Do we see atrocity and hunger? Do we see pain and suffering and hardship in this life? Yeah. That's the reality of it. That is life. Are we afraid that our freedoms will be taken away? I mean, seriously, do we think, if I dare put this, do we think that if we fast enough or pray enough that this very bad candidate won't be put into office? Friends, God does not necessarily work that way. He doesn't do that. Let's not paint him into a corner. Say, this is what you're supposed to do for me. God doesn't work like that. He's God. And he says in verse 25, my days are swifter than a runner. At first he says his days were so slow. And then now he's saying, the other times are just moving so fast. He was afraid. They flee away, they see no good, they slip by like a reed boat, like an eagle that swoops on its prey. I've heard that when an eagle is diving to catch its prey, it gets to speeds up to 150 miles an hour. This is how fast his life is moving, and he's afraid. Notice he says, though I say, I will forget my complaint, verse 27. Leave off my sad countenance, and be cheerful. I'm afraid of all my pains. I know that you will not acquit me. What's he saying here? He's saying he's afraid to be cheerful, knowing that there's no guarantee more suffering would not follow. Job was fighting confusion. He knew God was totally good. He did not know where he stood with God, because why would suffering come to him being upright? His walls and his box is breaking down. I see God's power, and yet I'm still suffering. We still suffer. The righteous and the wicked suffer. Here's another one. We may suffer like we are wicked. Though we're upright, we might suffer like we are wicked. Notice he says in 29, I am accounted wicked. I suffer like I am someone who's wicked. Why then should I toil in vain? Why should I sit there and cry out to God? I didn't do anything wrong, and yet he's acting like I did. It doesn't make sense. Not that God thinks he was wicked for trying to be cheerful. He's not saying that. It's earlier. As far as his friends were concerned, they thought Job was sinful. They thought Job was wicked. That's why he was suffering. But Job knew he wasn't suffering for sin, so what gives? And notice what he says here in verse 30. If I should wash myself with snow and cleanse my hands with lye, he would plunge me into the pit, and my own clothes would abhor me. What's he saying? He knew that self-cleansing was impossible. It's almost presumptuous. I mean, how can he establish his own righteousness before God on a human level? How can he do that? I can't do that. And then you read this here in verse 31. Doesn't that concern you? Yet you would plunge me into the pit, and my own clothes would abhor me. Doesn't that concern you? Why does he say something like this? I think it's because Job gives a little reminder to himself in two different spots. Here's the one spot, and he does it later on as well, specifically. He wants to make sure we understand God's not like us. That's where verse 32 and 33 come in. 32 and 33 explain verse 31. Because notice it begins with the word for. Key in Hebrew. For not a man as I am that I may answer him. That when we go to judgment together, there's no umpire. Really, a better word would be mediator. Not umpire like strike one, strike two. That's what I think of as umpire. You know, when I see that, I'm like, umpire, what? You ever play baseball? What's going on? No, better is mediator. There's no mediator between us who may lay his hand upon us both. So what's he saying? God's not like us. A person like us cannot answer back to God. God and humans cannot come together for mediation. I mean, I can't sit there and try and reconcile myself with God. I can't do that. It's not going to happen. That's his whole point. God's not like us. So what needs to happen? Only God himself can step in. Only God himself must step in. I mean, how can we try to reconcile ourselves with God? You'll run into that with people today, won't you? People say, hey man, I'm not a sinner. I'm a really good person. Right? So they try to reconcile themselves with God. We can't do that. How can we try to reconcile ourselves with God? It's totally impossible. We are all to be damned. Period. But knowing this, God himself has stepped in. God himself has stepped in through the eternal Son of God. Because Paul says it. For there's one God, and one mediator also between God and man. Who is it? The man? Christ Jesus. See, God did what we can't do. God stepped in. He had to step in to reconcile, to bring mediation, because God should judge sinners. Mark, you prayed that today. If there's someone here, if you're here and you don't know Christ, you're not a follower of Jesus, you must see that God should condemn you. And yet, he's also provided a mediator. It's Jesus, who took on flesh and he lived a perfect life, and he was crucified for sinners upon the cross, and he resurrected from the dead. Turn from your sin, repent, and trust in Christ, who's the mediator. He can mediate between you and the Father. Not you, but Jesus. Job wants to emphasize, God's not like us. Don't think that he is. And then he continues on. We're still going to suffer. Righteous and wicked suffer. We may suffer like the wicked. And then last, we may suffer tremendous pain. We may suffer tremendous pain. In 9:34 through chapter 10, verse 1. Let him remove his rod from me. Let not the dread of him terrify me. Then I would speak and not fear him. I am not like that in myself. Not only did Job feel inadequate, he felt fear because of God's apparent hostility towards him. He knew that only God could take away this hostility, this rod. And if God did, he would not feel such fear of God. And yet notice he says, I loathe my own life. I'll give full vent to my complaint. I will speak in the bitterness of my soul. Job was in great pain, and yet he was confused. He knew God was good. He knew the pain came from God. He knew he was an upright person. He knew that suffering did not come from particular sin, and yet he still had tremendous pain. God's rod he didn't understand. So he goes through this whole process, and then he goes through the process again. And this time, first he was talking about God's power and nature. Now he's going to become a little bit more personal. He's not just going to talk about God's power in nature. Now he's going to talk about specifically, I see your power again in making me. God's power making humans. You see that a little bit in verse 3 and then 8 through 13. In verse 3, like right in the middle, he says, rejecting the labor of your hands, the work of your hands. That's who we are. And he describes it. Look at verse 8. Your hands fashioned and made me. Would you destroy me? Remember now, you made me as clay. Would you turn me into dust? Verse 10. Did you not pour me out like milk and curdle me like cheese? Clothe me with skin, flesh. Verse 12. You've granted me life and loving kindness. Your care has preserved my spirit. Job acknowledged and he praised God for his greatness. He knew God's intentions to make humans was good. He understood that. You made me, but are you now going to swallow me up? I made of clay. Will you now turn me back into dust? Notice, you see that there in verse 10? Curdle me like cheese, pour me out like milk. He's describing the production of cheese from milk. It's like the concept of conception. That's how it came about, in a beautiful, poetic way. You give me life. You give me steadfast love. And then notice God's providence preserving him. I see your power in this, God. Job knew God had a purpose in making humanity that was wise and good. Look at verse 13. Yet these things you conceal in your heart. And the New American Standard has, I know that this is within you. Well, the ESV, I think it translates this better. I know your good purpose, I think how it translates it in ESV, which I think is better. This is why he was confused. Because he knew God had a good purpose in this, in making humans. And yet we're still suffering. I suffer badly. Why would you create me only to destroy me? You ever had somebody ask you that? Why does God create people and then kill them? Why does God create people and yet they die? Why does God do that? And they suffer tremendously. That's what Job is asking here. I'm confused. And yet, is God showing us love by having us go through pain? Is God showing you love by having you suffer? Or how does the song go? What if God's blessing came through raindrops, through tears? What if 1,000 sleepless nights are what it takes for you to love God? What if God crushes us so that we will want, love, worship, adore, cling to, yearn for, desire, pant after, delight in, focus on, and glorify God alone? What if that's what he wants to do? Are you suffering today? Or you feel like he's crushing you? To the point where you're saying, why'd you create me to have me go through this? Friend, he wants you. That you would love him, you worship him, adore him, and you would see his power, and that you know what? You can demand nothing from God. That's what he wants. He will do as he's going to do. So he paints this picture. I see your power in making me. I see this. And yet the righteous suffer and the wicked prosper. It doesn't make sense. I'm confused. You see that in verse 3 and then 7 through 9. In verse 3, is it right for you indeed to oppress, to reject the labor of your hands, and to look favorably on the schemes of the wicked? And then 7, according to your knowledge, I am indeed not guilty, yet there's no deliverance from your hand. And he goes into how he says, will you destroy me, though you made me? Return to dust, though you made me of clay. God, I don't get it. Why are you oppressing me? Why do you reject what your hands have made? Why does it seem like you're looking favorably towards those who are evil? It seems like the wicked prosper and I suffer. Why? I mean, God, what will you gain by doing this to me? Why do you favor the wicked? Very similar to what you see in Psalm 73. The psalmist says the same thing. It seems like the wicked are prospering. So it seems. But God, I understand your power, and yet it seems like to me you're allowing the righteous to suffer and the wicked to prosper. And yet, interesting, notice, I told you this, he does this twice. God is not like us. God, you're not, now he makes it personal. God, you're not like us. He embeds that 4 through 7. He says, you have eyes of flesh, do you see as a man? Are your days as days of mortal? Are your years as man's years? Why is he saying this? He's saying, God, you know I'm not wicked. You can see me. This is the heart of the matter. You don't see as human sees. You're not mortal. How do people look? They look in the outer portions, huh? That's why he closes this. According to your knowledge, I am indeed not guilty. I haven't done anything wrong. And God, you know it. Now, Bildad and Eliphaz, I don't know what their problem is. But they think I've sinned. Why? Because they look at the external. God, you can see my heart. You can see who I really am. God sees the end from the beginning because he's decreed all things. He's endless. He's always been and always will be. I know, oh God, that you know me, and I know that you know your plan. God's not like us. Friends, the gospel does not guarantee us less misery than Job's. For some it might be less. For some of us it might be the same. For some of us it could be more. But are we not called to share in the sufferings of Christ? Philippians chapter 3, verse 10, that's what Paul says, right? To be conformed into his death, to share in his sufferings. Oh, we marked that part out of our Bibles, don't we? That's a black marker translation, right? Like that translation? Black marker translation. Was Jesus not called a man of sorrows? We brought this up last week. What about Abraham? What about Jacob? Joseph? Moses? Ruth? Hannah? David? Hosea? Jeremiah? What about all those guys? What about the guys that the writer of Hebrews says? Others experienced mockings, scourgings, yes, also chains and imprisonment, stoned, sawn in two, tempted, they were put to death with the sword, land in sheep's skins and goat skins, destitute, afflicted, ill-treated, wandering in deserts and mountains and caves and holes in the ground. That's in the Hall of Faith, chapter 11 of Hebrews. What about all of them? These faced much hardship, friends. Job would find that there's more to God than simply protecting us from harm. There's more to God than simply rescuing us from trouble. There's more to God than just healing your disease. There's more to that. God is with us. And we must trust him that he is God and he knows what he's doing. By the way, did you notice that Job never asked, and he never will ask, for God to cure him? He asked for relief. We're going to look at that in a moment. But he never asked God to cure him. Two more points in reference to this not adding up. Talking about God's power and everything. God, you're not like us, but then he also brings up, this is confusing for me. This is confusing, and also, he says, and why do we exist? Verse 14 through 17. If I sin, then you take note of me. I will not acquit me of my guilt. If I'm wicked, woe to me. If I sin, you take, okay, bam, I'm not supposed to do that. I understand it, I get it. I'm guilty, okay, I get that. If I'm wicked, woe to me. But if I'm righteous, the brakes come on. righteous, I dare not lift up my head. He seems to be saying this.